The vacuum stopped humming the moment I heard the words. Your father in Switzerland just died searching for you. He left you everything $2.3 billion. For a second, the world froze somewhere between the clatter of an ice machine and the smell of bleach. I was still gripping the handle of the vacuum, the cord tangled around my boot, staring at a stranger in a charcoal suit that didn't belong in a roadside motel off Highway 81. His shoes alone could have paid my rent for 6 months. My name's Caleb Monroe, 25 years old. I clean rooms at the Sunrise Inn outside Wichita, Kansas. For 9 years, I've stripped beds, scrubbed toilets, and breathed in enough cleaning chemicals to make my lungs sting every night. Most days, I measure success by whether the vending machine gives me my dollar back. That morning was supposed to be like any other quiet, anonymous forgettable. Until this man in the suit said my name like he'd been practicing it for years. He introduced himself as Detective Marcus Hall, his voice calm, carrying a faint European accent that didn't fit anywhere near a Kansas winter. I've been looking for you for a long time, he said, pulling out a leather folder. Your father, Richard Vaughn, passed away last week. He left you his entire estate. I almost laughed. My father died when I was 3. Plane crash off the coast of Florida. My mother told me that story every year like scripture. Yet here was this stranger speaking as if the last 22 years of my life were built on a lie. Marcus opened the folder and slid a photo across the housekeeping cart. A man with gray hair standing beside a silver sports car, smiling. The same eyes, same crooked grin, same birthmark above the eyebrow. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. Then came the sentence that yanked me out of disbelief. There's a condition. You have 72 hours to uncover why your mother ran from him, or everything goes to charity. I stared down at my hands, cracked and raw from bleach. The skin between my knuckles split open like old paper. The kind of hands that never touched luxury, only work. I couldn't reconcile the idea that somewhere across the ocean, a man who looked like me had been searching the world with private investigators while I scrubbed mildew out of shower grout. Why me, I finally asked. Why now? Marcus hesitated, eyes scanning the hallway, as if the walls might be listening. Because your father believed your mother was hiding something worth killing for. The air in that narrow motel corridor seemed to tighten around us. Outside, a delivery truck roared by, rattling the window glass. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear him say, "The clock started the moment I found you." I looked down the hall at the empty rooms, at the life that had felt permanent just 5 minutes ago, and realized everything I thought I knew about my family, my mother, even myself, had just been rewritten. And the part that scared me most wasn't the money, it was what I'd have to learn to earn it. I didn't ask Marcus any more questions that morning. I just kept nodding like someone trying to stay afloat after being pushed into deep water. But when he left, taking his expensive silence with him, the motel went back to smelling like bleach and cigarettes. And I went back to remembering. Because that's what shock does. It shakes loose the things you've tried to bury. I was 17 when my mother told me to leave. It was a Saturday late summer, the air thick with the sound of cicadas and cheap beer cans rolling across the porch. Rick Dalton. Her new boyfriend was already drunk by noon. He had that kind of mien that comes from habit, not circumstance, slow, predictable, and cruel in a way that never raised his voice. That day he told her I was poisoning the house with attitude. My mother didn't argue. She just stared at the kitchen floor like the answer was written there. Then she said, without looking up, "Maybe it's time you find your own way, Caleb." That sentence was the softest kind of violence. I remember standing in the doorway holding a trash bag with everything I owned, 2 shirts, a Bible my grandmother left me, and a photo of Mom and me at the county fair when life still felt like it might turn out okay. She didn't even come outside when I left. For a while, I slept in my old Ford Escort behind a truck stop outside Topeka. You learn quickly which parking lots are safe, which gas stations let you wash up if you look tired enough, and how hunger changes your body language. I worked odd jobs washing dishes, mowing lawns, shoveling snow, anything that kept my hands busy enough to drown out the noise in my head. When the Escort finally died, I walked 3 miles to the Sunrise Inn and asked for work. The manager, a woman named Carla, with kind eyes and nicotine fingers, handed me a mop and said, "Start in room 12. The couple last night left a mess. That's how my life started to shrink. Hallways, bathrooms, vending machines. I learned the rhythm of quiet labor wake at 4, bleach at 6, pray at 8, sleep by 10. The days blurred together until shame became routine, like clocking in. People talk about hitting rock bottom like it's one moment. It's not. It's a slow erosion of who you used to be. Every time someone tossed me a towel without eye contact, every time I scrubbed lipstick off a mirror and saw my reflection fade beneath the foam, I felt myself disappear a little more. Still, I told myself stories to survive. That Mom was happy. That Rick eventually stopped drinking. That maybe someday I'd have enough saved to start over. And always, always that Dad had died a hero, his plane falling into the Atlantic, his love sealed in the tragedy of distance. It's strange how lies can become oxygen when you need to keep breathing. 9 years later, in that same motel, surrounded by the same walls I'd cleaned 1,000 times, those lies finally collapsed. A stranger in a suit had walked in and handed me proof that the man I mourned was alive the whole time, and that my mother had been the one to bury him in words. The truth wasn't a rescue. It was a summons. I couldn't sleep that night. The motel walls groaned under the winter wind, and every sound made me think of that man in the suit. I kept seeing his calm face, his steady eyes, the way he said, "Your father left you everything," like it was the most ordinary sentence in the world. The next morning, Marcus Hall came back. He was waiting for me in the lobby, standing too straight for a place that sold coffee out of a vending machine. He held a briefcase, dark leather, polished like something that had never seen Kansas dust. "Mr. Monroe," he said, nodding. "May I come in?" We sat in the manager's office. Carla gave me a look, half worry, half curiosity, before closing the door behind us. Marcus placed the briefcase on the desk, clicked it open, and spread out a stack of papers, photos, and embossed documents. "This is your father," he said. The photograph hit harder than I expected. A man in his 50s, hair silver at the temples, standing beside a red sports car with the words Vaughn Automotive Group printed on the wall behind him. His smile was reserved, the kind you give when you're used to cameras. But the jawline, the eyes, God, even the slight tilt of his head, it was me. Older, wealthier, unbroken. "I don't understand," I said, but my voice came out thin. Marcus leaned forward. "Your father's name was Richard Vaughn, founder of Vaughn Automotive Group. Zurich, Switzerland. He built one of Europe's largest luxury car empires. For 20 years he searched for you." "Impossible," I said. "My mother told me he died when I was a kid." Marcus opened another folder, this one stamped with multiple government seals. "Your mother, Elaine Monroe, was born Elaine Richter. She married Richard Vaughn in 1996. In 1999, she fled Switzerland with you and created new identities for both of you. The death certificates of Richard Vaughn and his son Caleb were falsified. She's been hiding in the United States ever since." The words didn't fit inside me. They clanged around like loose metal in an empty room. She kidnapped me. Yes. Marcus's tone was steady, but not unkind. Your father spent over $45 million hiring private investigators, data experts, even Interpol liaisons. He followed false leads through France, Argentina, Canada. Everywhere. He believed you were alive. He just didn't know where. I stared at the glossy photo. The man's posture. The gentle curve of his smile. And he's dead now. Marcus nodded. Heart failure 1 week ago. The search consumed him. He left specific instructions for his estate. If you're found, you inherit everything. But there's a clause. You must uncover the truth of why your mother ran and provide legal proof within 72 hours of confirmation. Otherwise, the inheritance transfers to the International Children's Foundation. I laughed, but it came out hollow. 72 hours to solve a mystery 20 years old. That's insane. It's what he wanted. Marcus said quietly. He believed whatever your mother was running from was still dangerous. He thought you deserved to know before the truth disappears forever. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough to drown out my heartbeat. Somewhere in that rhythm, the years I'd lost began to align the lies, the silence, the empty seat at every birthday. I wasn't cleaning rooms anymore. I was standing on the edge of a story that started long before I was old enough to understand it. And for the first time in my life, I realized that the person I trusted most might be the reason I never knew who I truly was. I left the motel 2 days later, with everything I owned shoved into a single duffel bag. Marcus waited outside in a black Mercedes that looked like it had no business in Kansas. The morning sky was the color of wet concrete, and my breath fogged against the window as we drove west. Neither of us spoke much. I watched the flatlands give way to mountains, each mile pulling me closer to a house I'd spent 9 years trying to forget. Marcus filled the silence with pieces of my father's life business meetings in Zurich, racing weekends in Monaco, the empire he'd built from nothing. I listened, but all I could see was my mother's kitchen table, the one where she once told me we couldn't afford birthday candles, but could always afford hope. By the time we reached Springdale, Colorado, the sun was falling behind the peaks, washing the town in a dull amber light. The streets looked smaller, the air thinner. I recognized the gas station on the corner, the diner where she used to work double shifts. It was like stepping into a photograph I'd tried to burn. Her house sat at the end of Maple Street, the same sagging porch, same chipped mailbox. The paint, once yellow, had faded into the color of old bone. For a moment I thought about turning back, letting the secret die with her. But Marcus's voice cut through my hesitation. Remember, Caleb, you have 72 hours. I nodded and walked up the cracked path. The porch creaked under my weight. I knocked once, then again. When the door opened, time fractured. She was smaller than I remembered. Her hair, once the color of chestnuts, had turned gray, pulled into a loose braid that made her look older than her years. Her hands trembled as she gripped the doorframe. Caleb, she whispered, like saying my name might summon ghosts. Hi, Mom, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. Her eyes filled instantly. Oh, God, you shouldn't have come here. I stepped inside without waiting for permission. The living room smelled like dust and old coffee. The same sofa, the same pictures on the wall, except now every face in the frames was a lie. Dad's dead, I said. And he died searching for me. She covered her mouth, her knees buckling. For a second I thought she might faint. You don't understand, she whispered. You don't know what you're walking into. Then tell me, I said, sharper than I intended. Tell me what was so dangerous that you had to steal my entire life. Her shoulders shook. She looked at me the way people look at traffic accidents, unable to turn away but terrified to face the wreckage. "There are things you don't understand," she said. "Things that could still get us killed." The room went silent, except for the ticking of a clock I hadn't heard since childhood. Rage and grief wrestled inside me, old wounds tearing open beneath new truths. I'd imagined this moment for years, what I'd say if I ever saw her again. But standing there face to face with the woman who lied to me, all I could think was how fragile she looked, and how despite everything, part of me still wanted to protect her. She didn't answer me right away. For a long moment, she just stood there in the middle of that faded living room, her eyes darting between me and the window like she was listening for footsteps outside. The air felt heavy, thick with everything unsaid. Finally, she exhaled and whispered, "Wait here." I followed her down the narrow hallway past the bedroom I used to sleep in, the door still covered with the same peeling stickers from when I was 10. She stopped at the end of the hall, opened her closet, and pushed aside a row of hanging clothes. Hidden behind them was a small metal trunk rusted at the hinges, locked with an old clasp. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out. "I've been waiting for the day this would find me," she said. "I just didn't think it would come wearing your face." The latch snapped open with a sound that didn't belong in this quiet house. Inside were folders, yellowed photos, and documents written in German. Some pages bore seals I didn't recognize, government crests, police logos, stamped signatures. Others were letters folded and refolded so many times the paper was almost transparent. She sat on the edge of the bed and began to talk. Her voice was low at first, careful, like she was afraid the story itself might hurt someone. "Your father, Richard, he wasn't an ordinary man. You know that now. But what you don't know is that he had a brother, Edward Vaughn. Edward handled the company's finances, but he was greedy. He made deals with men who didn't belong anywhere near our lives, Eastern European syndicates, people who used the dealerships to launder money and move weapons. Richard found out." She looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "The night he confronted Edward, everything changed. Edward showed up at our house drunk, furious, screaming that Richard had ruined him. He went to your room. The image hit me like a cold wind. My room." She nodded. "You were 2. He had a gun. He pointed it at your crib." Her voice cracked, the words unraveling between sobs. "Richard tackled him. There was shouting, a shot fired into the wall. The next day, Edward was dead. An explosion at the warehouse he owned. The police called it an accident, a gas leak. But I knew better. Your father did what he had to do to protect us." She reached for one of the newspaper clippings in the trunk, the headline written in German, "Businessman dies in factory fire." Underneath, a black and white photo of a younger Edward smiling in a way that suddenly looked cruel. After Edward's death, his partners wanted revenge, she said. They blamed Richard. He started getting threats, letters, phone calls, men watching our house from cars. He hired security, but it wasn't enough. I was terrified every time I heard a car slow down outside. She paused, staring at the open box like it contained a ghost. "Richard told me to take you and disappear. He said he'd follow once it was safe." But days turned into weeks, and the threats didn't stop. I realized the only way they'd ever stop looking for us was if they thought we were dead. I sank into the chair beside her. The world I'd known, every lie, every missing piece, suddenly rearranged itself into something I didn't recognize. My father wasn't the man who abandoned us. My mother wasn't just the woman who betrayed me. They were 2 people trapped in a tragedy that refused to end. She closed the trunk softly, her hands still shaking. "You think I ran because I didn't love him," she said. "But I ran because I did. And for the first time that night, I didn't know whether to hate her or thank her. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The room smelled like rust and mothballs, the air heavy with all the years we'd lost. My mother kept her eyes on the closed trunk, her fingers tracing the dents along its lid, as if it were a wound she could still feel. I thought the story was over, that she'd finally told me everything. But then she whispered, almost to herself, "It got worse after we came here." She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and kept talking. "We landed in New York under new names, Elaine and Caleb Monroe. I took a job at a small grocery store outside Syracuse. I thought we'd finally disappeared. For a while it felt almost normal. You went to kindergarten. You made friends." I started smiling again. Her voice cracked. Then Rick came along. I'd tried for years not to remember him, the stench of whiskey, the way he filled a room like mold. "He said he was just passing through," she continued. "A mechanic looking for steady work. He was charming then. Funny attentive. He made me believe I could have a life again." She laughed bitterly. "He didn't even wait a year before the drinking started. By then I was too tired to run again, too scared to raise you alone in a country where we didn't really exist." Her eyes glistened as she looked at me. "You remember how he used to yell when you spoke back? How you'd hide under the table?" I told myself it was temporary, that I could control him. "But monsters don't stop because you ask nicely." She stood up, crossed the room, and pulled a cigarette from a half-empty pack on the counter. Her hands shook as she lit it. "5 years after we met, he found the box. The words hit me harder than I expected. He found that—" She nodded. "I came home from work, and he was sitting at the table with it open. Every document spread out, every photo lined up. He'd read everything, your father's name, the inheritance, the real story. He looked at me and smiled in that way only drunk men do, like they've just found God, and he owes them money." "What did he do?" I asked quietly. "He told me he was going to call Richard, said a billionaire would pay anything to see his son again. He wanted cash, a house, a new life. I begged him not to." He laughed. She exhaled smoke that trembled in the light. "That night he hit me for the first time. Said if I ever told anyone, he'd tell the world who we were. And if those men from Europe were still out there, they'd come for both of us. So you kicked me out," I said. Tears rolled down her face, cutting through the powdery makeup she still wore out of habit. "I thought I was saving you, Caleb. He was paranoid, convinced someone would recognize you. You looked too much like your father. I figured if you were gone, he'd stop. He promised he'd keep quiet if you never came back." I couldn't speak. My throat ached with all the years I'd spent hating her, all the nights I'd called her name in anger. "Rick died 3 years after you left," she said softly. "His liver gave out before his guilt did. I should have felt free, but I didn't. I kept that box locked away, afraid opening it would bring everything back. And it did." She crushed the cigarette in the ashtray and looked at me, her voice breaking. "Now you know why I lied, why I pushed you away. Every choice I made was wrong, but every one of them was meant to keep you alive." The silence that followed was heavier than any truth I'd ever known. For a long time after she finished, neither of us moved. The house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming in the next room. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, but inside, everything felt suspended, like time had paused to watch what would happen next. Then my mother said, almost to herself, "There's one more thing." She reached into the trunk again, her fingers trembling, and pulled out a sealed envelope wrapped in a thin layer of dust. The paper was thick, yellowed with age, and sealed with dark red wax stamped with a crest I didn't recognize, a V surrounded by laurel leaves. "It came 5 years ago," she said quietly. "A lawyer delivered it after Rick died. I couldn't bring myself to open it. I thought if I did, everything I'd buried would come roaring back." She placed it in my hands. "Maybe it's time." The envelope felt heavy, like it carried more than paper. My thumb brushed over the wax seal before I broke it open. Inside was a single letter, written in deep blue ink, each word crafted with the precision of a man who never wasted anything, not time, not money, not emotion. My dearest Elaine, if you are reading this, I am gone. And perhaps enough years have passed for the truth to find its place among us. The men who hunted us are no longer alive to do harm. Those who followed my brother's path have been imprisoned, their power stripped. The danger that once bound us in fear has ended. I have spent my life chasing the ghosts of my own making. I know now that what you did, taking our son, disappearing, came not from malice, but from love, twisted by terror. For that, I forgive you completely. Tell our son that he was never abandoned. Every day I searched for him, I built something for him, not just an empire, but a legacy meant to sustain him when I could not. If fate allows, let him return home. The estate, the business, the future, it all belongs to him. But he must understand why you ran before he accepts what I leave behind. Love is rarely clean, Elaine. Sometimes it must destroy the world it lives in to keep what matters safe. With eternal love, Richard Vaughn. By the time I reached the end, my hands were shaking. My mother was crying silently beside me, one hand pressed against her mouth. The words blurred on the page as my own tears fell over them. "He forgave me," she whispered. "After everything, he still forgave me." I nodded, unable to speak. The man I'd thought was a stranger had died loving us both, and the woman I'd thought was my enemy had spent her life protecting me from a danger I never knew existed. In that small, dim room, surrounded by fading photographs and old secrets, we sat together for the first time as equals, not mother and son, not liar and victim, but two survivors bound by a truth that had finally stopped running. For the first time in years, I reached out and took her hand. "We can stop hiding now," I said. She smiled through her tears. "Then let's start living." A week later, I stood at the Zurich airport, watching my breath cloud against the glass. The Alps rose in the distance like silent witnesses, sharp and endless under the morning light. I hadn't been back to Europe since I was a toddler, but the air felt strangely familiar, crisp, disciplined, honest. Maybe it was just the weight of everything that had finally come undone. When I arrived at the Vaughn Automotive Group headquarters, I half expected to feel like an imposter. But walking through the marble atrium, I realized this wasn't just my father's world anymore. It was mine to understand, not inherit blindly. The employees bowed their heads slightly as I passed, whispering the name they'd only ever seen in boardroom documents: Caleb Vaughn. In my new office, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city below. The desk still smelled faintly of his cologne, leather, and cedar. I ran my hand across the surface, imagining him sitting there mapping out his search for a son who no longer existed under his name. Next to the window, I hung a photograph of him and my mother in their 20s, laughing wind in their hair before the fear began. Beneath it, I wrote a note on a small card and taped it to the frame. Sometimes the truth we run from is the one that sets us free. Money never interested me. What stayed with me were the faces I'd seen over the years, kids huddled outside bus stations, sleeping in cars, trying to disappear like I once did. With part of my inheritance, I started the Monroe Foundation, dedicated to giving shelter education and mentorship to homeless teens. It wasn't charity. It was redemption, a way to make meaning out of everything that had broken us. Every few weeks, I'd call my mother from Switzerland. She was rebuilding too, volunteering at a community kitchen in Colorado, planting a small garden in her yard. Our conversations were soft, careful, like two people learning a new language built on forgiveness. We didn't talk about the past much anymore. We didn't have to. The silence between us had finally turned gentle. 3 months later, I visited my father's grave. It sat on a hillside overlooking Lake Zurich, the kind of view that made the world feel both vast and fragile. Snow covered the ground in a thin, perfect layer untouched, except for my footprints. I laid a bouquet of white lilies against the headstone, brushing away the frost, so I could read his name. "You spent your life searching for me," I said quietly. "Now I'll spend mine searching for others like me." The wind picked up, carrying my words into the stillness. For the first time, I felt something loosen in my chest, a peace I didn't know I'd been waiting for. As I walked back down the hill, the first light of morning broke through the clouds, painting everything gold. The snow crunched beneath my boots, each step echoing like a promise. And for once, I wasn't running from the past. I was walking toward the life it had been trying to give me all along. If this story touched your heart, tell me what part moved you the most in the comments. I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Share your city or country below. Don't forget to subscribe to Domestic Tragedy for more powerful true stories about family forgiveness and second chances. Your voice and support keep these stories alive.